Hi, my name is Taryn Cook. I am the Launch Community Manager here at Found Village, and also a licensed social worker.
Yes, and my name is Joshua Ridgway. I am a longtime volunteer, fan of Found Village, and I am also a licensed social worker.
Yeah, so we're here today to cover the topics of poverty and cultural competency.
Yeah, so Taryn's going to be telling us a little bit about, why we're addressing poverty and cultural competency. It's also important to know why is it even needed in, volunteering with our Found Village youth.
Yeah, so we say we serve teens from hard places, but it's very important to note that a lot of these hard places that they're coming from are not often chosen behaviors or actions, but it's something they're born into. So, for instance, as we touch base on poverty, just thinking back into there's four different types of poverty, and the one that we see the most is generational poverty. But there's also situational poverty, which a lot of Americans experienced the last 2 years with COVID and losing a job and losing income, as well as immigrant-related poverty and working class poverty.
And yeah, as Taryn said, a lot of the youth that we work with, they are coming from situations where they are maybe in generational poverty. And it's important to understand like the definition of what is generational poverty. So the definition of generational poverty is families having lived in poverty for at least two generations. So that is the basic definition of what generational poverty is. But in doing this work and working with these youth, what you will begin to realize, and what studies have shown, and what we all realize, is that it's way more than just two generations. You think back to the experiences of people of color, especially African American people or African people who are coming to this country against their will. That's generational poverty. So since the beginning of African Americans' experience here in this country, it's been generational poverty. And so what we need to understand is that there are things working against our youth and the kids that we work with that are out of their control. It's been out of their control. It was out of their parents' control. It was out of their grandparents' control. And that's just sort of the systems and the topics and stuff and issues that we try to come against and work against.
Yeah, and as Josh said, not everybody is born into a clean slate. We look at some statistics of young women. If you were the product of teen pregnancy, you have a 50% higher chance of being a teen parent yourself. 80% of women in foster care become pregnant prematurely. And then thinking of our foster youth population, 1 in 4 foster youth will be homeless when they're emancipated from the state's care. And, when I first heard that stat, and we work with emancipated foster youth as well as, just other kids living in the Cincinnati area, it's like, oh, 1 in 4, that's so high. Like we wouldn't fall into that category. Like we're an exception. But looking at our population, we are not an exception. No one is an exception to these rules, or these things that they're just born into. Like it's out of their control. And Found Village and our population is no exception to those statistics.
Yeah, and so as you begin, and as we continue to dive into this work, it's important that we in a way do some self-reflection. So thinking about your life experiences, what are the things and certain privileges that you've been instilled with, privileges or values that you've been instilled with? So one of the things that kind of come to mind for me is the value of education. My parents pushed education. They told me I was going to college, even when I, was resistant to it. Their parents pushed education. But my grandparents, they didn't have a college education, but that was a value that they seen that was important and that they decided to instill in my parents. And so my parents have instilled it in me. And so that I believe and think that that is something that I am already doing and will instill in my kids. But that it didn't always exist. And so we kind of pick these things up as we kind of grow and we pass these things down. So in doing this work, one of the things that we'll ask is that you do some self-reflection and looking at your own values, not only just your values, but your family values. We all come and pick up different things as we kind of mature in life. And some of those things are stuff that we kind of educate ourselves on, or things that, get passed down to us. So it's really important as we do this work is to do some self-reflection and understanding, okay, what am I bringing to the table? What are the values and privileges that, that I have myself?
Yeah, and we hope that the hardship scale assessment was a time to do some self-reflection about what privileges you do have, and maybe some that you didn't think were privileges, but they are. For instance, looking at that list, there was, growing up in a household that had uh, 50 books. If you have 5 kids in the house, it's not very hard to get to 50 books, but that is a privilege, as well as going to a summer camp. I think the one that is really big that sticks out for me is having more than one car for your household. So thinking big picture wise, like, if my car breaks down, I have some really supportive family members that would definitely let me borrow one of their extra cars, or maybe I can take an Uber to work. But for our families that we're serving and families who experience generational poverty, if their car breaks down, like, that's their way of getting to work. They just lost an income. They could be living paycheck to paycheck, and that just crushed their world, their livelihood. Especially thinking of, like, in our launch community, a lot of our young men, they help out their families. So if they're also borrowing the car or they're sharing a vehicle with their parent, that's 2 people that just lost a job if they can't get there. And they're not on a bus line, which also the bus is not as affordable as you would think it is. About $275, and you might have to take 3 stops along the way, or 3 buses along the way. So it's things like that we may take for granted, that we just ask that you really sit on and do some self-reflection as we start this journey together with our young people at Found Village.
Yeah, and so what are some of the ways in which, those things are addressed, not only, for ourselves, but like in our nation, in our country? Some of the ways that, we may have heard these things addresses equality. Like, so if we have better equality, then that will, help combat some of these situations. And kind of like use an example that Taryn, that you spoke about, is like with the car. Like, is it helpful if a family is in need of a car, that just everyone, even if I have 2 cars, like I get a car too? That's what equality is. And what we want to focus more on is equity. And what equity says is, not only is it important that the family that needs a car gets a car, and the people who don't need a car don't get a car, but it says that, the family that's in need of a car, we're going to help not only give you a car, but we're going to help educate you and to teach you how to, like, maintain. Like, I don't know about most of you, or if you've ever experienced this, but when I first had my car, man, I did oil changes, car maintenance. Goodness, that was a lot to keep up with. I didn't know and wasn't aware of when it came to having a car. So it's not only just giving out resources, but it's all right, how do we educate and equip those who are in need of it to help maximize their experience in having these resources and things like that.
Yeah. And so as we're thinking of how this is affecting our young people, just wanting to say, like, this isn't something that's an easy fix. And also that our young people are not broken and do not need to be fixed. Yes, they need support. And, we need you to understand the complexity of their background. But just to emphasize that again, like, our kids aren't something to be fixed.
Yeah, and kind of just kind of add on to that, like, I love what you said about being a support. There's a difference
Mhm.
between supporting a young person and trying to fix them. And I think when we're trying to fix something, we can put a time span on it. Like, oh, so in 6 months, like, I would have changed this young person's life, and they'll be, off to college and, doing whatever. But when we're there as a support, we're there for the relationships. And, we want to be a place where we have safe adults that are important, and that a place where, you know, where we're building a village of support for our young people. And like Terrence said, not trying to solve or not trying to fix them, but being a support. I just want to emphasize that being a support. Like that's when we see the change
Mhm.
that they want to see within themselves. Not that we want to see within them, but the change that they want to see within themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to be able to do that, we have to keep ourselves in check. And some ways to do that, one would be there's this book called When Helping Hurts. And I'm just going to read a quote from it. Until we embrace our mutual brokenness, our work with low income people is likely to do more harm than good. I am not okay, and you are not okay. And I think what that speaks to is, we're not helping to fill a void in ourselves. We have to understand and embrace the brokenness and work on that ourselves and not seek that from the young people that we're serving. And another way is in volunteering, there's sometimes some unintentional motives for the work that can be used to fulfill personal needs. A need to save or fix. Sometimes some things that come to mind of what, people have said before are, once I'm in their lives, their problems are going to be solved. Like, I'm going to be able to help fix all of these things for them. Like, I'm going to be the one to change their world. And this is called saviorism. And I think something to point out is like, we want you guys to be the champions for them. We want you to walk along that journey with them. But again, just going back to like, our kids aren't something to be fixed. Relationships are what help get them through these things, and they need support through these things. But we are not going to step in and fix these problems for them.
And yes, just continuing on, like it's a constant struggle. I think Tanner might agree. Like in being social workers, like we've been doing this for years now, and that's something that I still that we still have to kind of check ourselves on.
For sure.
And to like ask a question like, oh, what I'm frustrated about this situation, but all right, it's not necessarily them that I'm frustrated with, but what is it about me that I need to do
Mm-hmm.
some self-reflection on? And sometimes we fall, like I have that, make that mistake of like, oh, because I was trying to fix them and I was, frustrated by the outcome. And so in kind of doing that kind of self-reflection, there's a term called cultural competency. And there are four different components that Taryn, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing with us about the four different components of cultural competency.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first two, which is awareness of one's own cultural worldviews and attitudes towards cultural differences. So something to ask yourself, what are my unconscious biases? That's a big part of, utilizing that awareness and understanding like we all have them, and that's okay to say. We're saying it right now, like everyone has unconscious biases. But we need to utilize self-awareness to be able to keep ourselves in check and understand how that is affecting your interactions and reactions to things. So something to think about is, am I thinking about this from an equality mindset or an equity mindset? Do I expect the Found Village young people to respond, react, and interact the same way as my teenage daughter? You would not. That would be an equality mindset, is thinking that those both would react the same. When in reality, as we've talked about, generational poverty and all of these statistics working against them, their responses and reactions and interactions are going to be different. And it's not fair to compare those two things that are so vastly different. So we ask, and it is something to continue to ask yourself. And same thing here, again, like we all have unconscious biases. Sometimes taking a step back and wondering, okay, am I thinking this is how they should react? Or am I thinking about this from an equitable mindset and understanding that they're not going to be comparable to a baseline peer with the amount of trauma, generational poverty, and everything else working against them?
Yeah. And so as you can see, there is a lot of, not even say a lot, there's kind of what I would say is like internal self-reflection that we have to do for ourselves in doing this work. In addition to that, there's external things that we can do in understanding our youth and their experiences. But what I try to remind myself of is that it's not their responsibility to teach me about their cultural experiences, their cultural practices and worldviews. That is something that I can do as a responsible, I think I'm responsible adult on my own. And so I would say, look for different articles. In Found Village, we do a great job of sending out information in ways and to kind of keep up with your understanding of doing this work. Quick plug, the Found Village podcast. It's on Spotify. That is an amazing streaming podcast that I would highly suggest that you listen to, because it gives you that in-depth look into kind of the experiences that our youth face. And even if you look on the Found Village, the website, there are stories there that will help you understand the experiences that our youth are going through. So you don't have to be the person like, oh, tell me about this. I think there's nothing wrong with being curious about our youth and their experiences, but we also have to make sure it's like I'm not trying to put them on the spot for them to teach me. One benefit that I will say that I've experienced in terms of being curious and looking to understand is just in understanding the work that in the youth that we work with is around music. I'm a huge hip hop fan. Been some favorite rappers, Pac, Biggie, all those. But I found myself as I continued in this work being that old head, like oh, what is this trash music that's coming out now? I don't understand it. I had to go do the research. And through doing the research, and I actually developed an interest in some of the music. Like some of my favorite artists now are artists that my kids that I work with and the youth that I work with introduced me to. So it keeps you young too. That's a benefit of doing this work. Working with youth keeps you young.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. So yeah, as Josh said, we want you to be curious and we ask you to be curious. But just understanding the difference of am I asking to benefit myself or to benefit this relationship and to benefit the young person? So in conclusion, we hope that you walk away knowing more about the impact of generational poverty and thinking about how to see things from an equity mindset versus an equality mindset, which then helps us with our self-awareness and keeping ourselves in check. And the power of educating ourselves about cultural competencies. So thank you guys all for watching, and we look forward to having you as a part of our village. Thanks,
Welcome to
guys.
the village.